Hey everybody, JMac here. Wanted to continue the series of building Blueprint. I did a little work over the weekend and got busy Monday and Tuesday kind of preparing to leave for Australia, heading to Laracon AU next week. Going to spend a couple days before and after seeing the country and just kind of using it as a vacation. But I really want to finish this and honestly probably try to launch a beta maybe during Laracon AU. So I've definitely been doing some work on it, but I haven't kept up with the live streams. So I want to get back into those. But first, let me just kind of pre-record a little bit of a recap on where I am, some of that work I did, just kind of squeaked in over the weekend and in the evenings. So let's take a look at those. You can see that I've kind of broken this out and taken more shape into these generators and lexers and parsers. These are some bits of terminology we saw last time in some of the earlier videos that I guess I recorded. Also, you probably can't see it, but I got like a little word bank over here behind me on the whiteboard that I just kind of use, have a thesaurus, to just give me these different terms. So like when you think about compilers, there's all sorts of things and vocabulary around that, like grammar and syntax tree and lexers and parsers and so forth. So I'm just kind of like toying around with those and trying to, again, get a little closer to that final terminology, final objects inside the system, especially as I TDD more out. But what's more interesting is for now, I've just made this little build folder that we'll focus on to just kind of use as a recap for like the progress that's been made. So what gets kicked out now when I run Blueprint, so when I run like PHP Blueprint, I'm not going to run it right now, but it generates these two particular files. And again, it just throws them in the build folder. And so these look pretty familiar to us Laravel devs. First of all, we have this create posts. So we can see here that it took the ID, the string, content, timestamp, those timestamp columns. So we're getting some output here. It's not 100%. For example, we talked before about how maybe this could be condensed into like a nullable timestamp. I think there's some kind of column like that. And then, of course, there's no such thing at the moment of ID. That would be pretty cool shorthand, actually, but there isn't one just yet. So I think this is just identity or something like that, or increments, or whatever comes out of the default. So I'll want to clean this one up to use the shorthand that Laravel uses. So for the most part, though, we can see that this is actually getting generated. And then what was more interesting and probably took a little bit more time was generating this model class. And we talked before about how I wanted it to be a little bit smarter, a little bit more intuitive about kind of filling a model out instead of just giving you these stubs, right? These like empty stubs, and you got to go in and put a bunch of stuff in. So what I've done is basically the generator for the model will go in and pre-fill all the fillable columns. If you do kind of the unguarded approach, then you could just remove this, or maybe there'll be some configuration options for Blueprint for things like that. But we can see that it basically makes those string columns, non-timestamp, non-ID columns, all automatically in the fillable. There's a nice little cast attribute, which I've been a big fan of lately, especially as I've tested my applications more. I've found some nuance between like SQLite and MySQL, but also just even in my own coding, when I pass across request data, that some of the typing doesn't work out the way I want. So if I do like strict equality checks, sometimes those actually end up failing when I wouldn't have expected them to. And a lot of it ties back into this casting. So for example, here we cast the ID column as an integer. If I had other things, it's going to be smart enough to do that. So if I had a Boolean column, it's going to throw it in here. And then also the dates. This is a really nice one. It automatically casts things to dates. So this is kind of a shorthand for up here, if you're not familiar, like instead of doing published at and then like date time, instead you can just list that column directly in the dates here. So published at goes here. And created at and updated at, the timestamp columns are already part of this, as well as deleted at if you're using soft deletes. So pretty nice to see here how all this gets generated. There's some tests for some of this. Not all of it, because again, it's still kind of spiking out, but we can see that the parsers and the lexers the model parser, or sorry, the general parser and then the model lexer all have things for them. But these generators are relatively new. I'm still going to backfill the test for those. So let's just kind of take a look at what these look like. So right now, I just have this static class generator. It takes in the registry, which is really the syntax tree, if you will. So this is kind of that parsed lexed definition of whatever the terms were. So things that are kind of ready to be used, they're already parsed into like models and columns and eventually controllers and actions and so forth. So right now I just have these generators, but I think, again, just spiking here, I'm probably going to blow this away and create some kind of registry where you can actually register your own generators, and that's going to help Blueprint be extensible for all sorts of other ideas that people might have. So I know a couple people have mentioned like, oh, it'd be really cool if it generated stuff for Nova as well, like generates all the administrative backend panels based on, again, some kind of custom YAML syntax, right? Well, great. You can fire up a Nova generator, a Lexer. You can register those, and at that point, it'll output whatever you want, however you want, based on those. So again, I'll probably extend this initially with just the MVC, but there's so many other ideas that this could be used for. So I definitely want to make sure it's extensible, kind of in that final version 1. So the beta might not have that. It might be a little bit static like this. But the point is that it would be very easy to create just some kind of like registry here of all the different generators, and by default, actually helps if you give it some visibility. So if you just have some registry and then by default like this migration generator, model generator, controller generator, all that kind of stuff is in the registry, but there's a add generator method or register generator method where you can pass in something that conforms to an interface or a contract or whatever, and be able to create your own. So that's going to make Blueprint very extensible. So let's go into one of these generators just for example. Really what they do, they look a lot like the make commands inside of Laravel. So they pull out a stub. These stubs are just these top level files. So here's a factory stub, for example, migration stub here. There's model stubs and so forth. So all these stubs are just generic PHP templates that I basically go through, and I'll get the path of the way it's supposed to be. In this case, here's kind of like a model path, and then I'll populate that stub. And they have a very common API. So, and again, a lot of this is going to look very, very familiar to what you see in like the make migration command inside of Laravel. And same with the model. So we can see here that same thing. We loop over all the models. We're going to put the contents of these files by populating some kind of stub, in this case the model class stub, with information. So some of this stuff right now is hard-coded. This file get contents, file put contents. Probably want to make that more testable when I go back and backfill these tests. It kind of defaults things to the app namespace. As much as I don't like it and don't advocate for it, some people still use custom namespaces for their app namespace, or like a vanity namespace, if you will. So that'll probably need to be dynamic. But really all this is doing is going in, it's going to find all the fillable columns, so it really just, again, kind of ignores any of those default things you wouldn't want to be fillable, like the ID or the password or whatever, created, deleted at, whatnot. Same thing for like these castable columns. If we look at that, it's just a bunch of filtering through all those column definitions to find out like, hey, is this thing castable in some kind of way? Is it a Boolean, double float? Is it a decimal or unsigned decimal? Use those things. So yeah, it's pretty nice. And then I just have some pretty printing here that probably get pulled out to a helper. So other than that, I mean, that's really all I worked on. I mean, I shouldn't say that's all, because it was a couple days worth of work. But things really started flowing once I kind of got that migration generator built. It was very easy then to make the model generator, and really the only nuance or logic is really kind of determining what it is to be a fillable column. So I wanted to break these out into separate methods just to make sure they're super easy to update, because this list might grow. You know, there might be other things we don't want to be fillable, maybe a token or something. Just certain things that can't necessarily think of in the moment, but it's going to be very easy to go in and kind of clean these up. And these are all the kind of the based casts, but again, if Laravel ever adds more, it's just as simple as, you know, is it a 1-to-1 ratio or does it need some special handling like this decimal? So pretty straightforward stuff. I pushed everything out to a develop branch while I'm not advocating using that by any means. It is something that's out there if you kind of want to see the work. I know some people, whoops, we're going to go to GitLab. You know what? Instead of messing with the browser, let's just do git open. There we go. Git open's a nice little npm command that was actually a shell script that I wrote probably like a decade ago, and I think Paul Irish made it super awesome as an npm package. So I love this thing. I use it all the time. But anyways, it opens up the branch on whatever your Git service is, your hosted Git is, GitLab, Gitbucket, or Gitbucket, Bitbucket, GitHub, and it goes right to the branch or even the PR if you have one open. So, but anyways, the point is I have this develop branch, all those different commits like we just talked about here. So the basic parser, the Lexer, I brought in Illuminate support. You can see where I spiked on the model generators. I still have that just basic command line runner, that blueprint file, and then of course just this simple little build folder I'm going to use for now. So eventually those are going to be placed within your application, but for now, those can just kind of get output in this silly little build folder. So this dev branch will probably get squashed down, some of these commits, maybe even some of these things reverted. So again, if you kind of want to track the work and see the full code, you're welcome to dig around in here. But I wouldn't necessarily consider this in a super usable place, maybe other than generating some migrations and super simple models that you're going to have to copy and paste into your project yourself. So again, very rudimentary, not even tagging anything here, but you know, you're welcome to check it out. So with that, I think in the next live stream, which I'll do here in just a bit, I'm going to work on this factory stub. So we'll get a recap of how all these migrations and generators and so forth work by building this factory stub kind of together real time. So it'll be a good recap as well, but just wanted to demonstrate several of these files and classes that are I worked on over the last few days and kind of how the project's taking shape. So I will catch you all the rest of the time in the live streams. See ya.